Hi, my name is Zach Lockram, and I'm a managing principal at Asakura Robinson. We're happy to be working with the 10 by 10 team on the mobility aspects of the master plan, and I'm going to give you a short presentation here and look forward to our conversation on Tuesday. All right. So we're going to be talking a little bit about access and circulation in the park, looking at that through the lens of equity. Going to start off here with the MPRB's, a slightly edited version of the MPRB's definition that they use for racial equity. When all people have the ability to easily access and move around in parks regardless of race, gender, age, and ability. So I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in specific as we move through this process, but two kind of key things that I want to make sure that we have defined. When we talk about access, what we're talking about is people being able to get to the park. When we talk about circulation, we're talking about people being able to move around in the park. And each one of those things really has sort of key elements that relate back to this framework of equity that we want to look at this all through. When we talk about access, race, income, and gender are all strongly correlated to access to vehicles. So for us, the easier the park is to access by walking, biking, and transit, the more likely the park is to have a form of equitable access. So I'm going to walk through some mapping that we've done that actually looks at that access and helps us think about really kind of what communities have that ability to get to and move around the park easily, and which communities don't. Walking is really one of our base things. In fact, one of the things we say in transportation planning often is that almost everyone is a pedestrian at some point in their trip, even if it's just walking to and from the car. The map that you see on the screen right now is 15-minute and 30-minute watershed. So 15-minute in the little darker blue, 30-minute in the little bit lighter blue. And what you can see is the distance that a person can walk in 15 minutes, given the network of streets and sidewalks that are around the park space. So you can really see that within 15 minutes, this is kind of what we would think of as the neighborhoods around the park. And in fact, when we're talking about neighborhood parks, this is really one of our most important circles. It's sort of the stakeholders that have kind of the highest touch to the park space. So you can see that, this goes to the east about as far as Lindale, goes up into Bryn Mawr, goes into St. Louis Park, goes down around Minneapolis as, kind of the center of that square that you see there. One of the things that we want to do then is actually look at, well, who are the people that are within that 15-minute space and who really has that type of access. So this is some demographics, and you can see the breakdown in the 15-minute, in the 30-minute, and then comparing that overall to the city of Minneapolis as a whole. So some of the things that we notice here is that within that 15-minute circle, people are whiter than the city of Minneapolis as a whole. They are higher income than the city of Minneapolis as a whole, and they are more likely to be owners of their property than people within the city of Minneapolis as a whole. So kind of going out from there, next we look at biking. And biking, you can get a little bit further in that 15 minutes. This is a lot more people that actually have access by bike than do by walking. And, as a part of the whole Grand Round system, this is actually a very important way that people do move around our park system. Within that 15 minutes, you can see now, if we look to the east, we're getting deep into Phillips, all the way down, almost all the way around Lake Harriet, further into St. Louis Park, and in the north going actually north of Broadway. So when we look at the demographics here, what we actually see is that this breakdown is almost exactly the city of Minneapolis as a whole. You can see that it's much more aligned to the demographic breakdown of the city. So by both race and income levels, we've actually picked up a lot more people of color, and we've picked up a lot more lower income Minneapolitans as a part of this as well. But then one of the things that we want to look at with bicycling is, is everywhere within that square, and this is true for walking too, really actually equal in the type of access. So we've started to kind of draw lines by these major barriers. So we have rail lines, we have highways, we have different things that would actually block or make it more difficult for people to move around. So you can see on this map, when you look kind of to the southeast, when you look kind of to the southwest, it's actually a much more open, there's much fewer barriers between movement than there are, especially for people to the north, where you actually have to cross a rail line, followed by a highway, followed by another rail line, followed by another highway. And that can really impact how close people feel they are to things too. If something doesn't feel accessible, because there are so few entry points that you can actually make it through, that's going to actually limit their ability to come and actually use these sorts of spaces. We also wanted to look at this from a transit perspective, because this is actually one of the things that's going to be changing the most over the next few years as the Green Line extension is constructed. So right now, the most transit accessible place, the place that has the most frequent bus service, is sort of the corner to the southeast of the park that is kind of closest to Uptown, close to the mall, close to Lake Street. That's going to shift significantly when the new light rail is built to actually be around these new light rail stations. So right now, if we hop off on a bus and ride as far as we can, and then hop off and start walking when we get to the place we want to go, essentially these lines that you see here are how far you can get in a 15-minute ride. So you can see you can get into Linden Hills, you can get fairly far to the east, you can get fairly far to the south. It's a lot harder to actually travel to the north in the way that the current bus system is set up, because most of those buses will go actually downtown before they turn and actually head up north in that same amount of time. When we have the new light rail, that sort of primary point of access shifts from being at the Lake Street and actually moves kind of deeper into the neighborhood to that 21st Street station that's right adjacent to Cedar Lake. And you can see that there's actually a pretty significant growth of the areas that you can get to by transit. And that's, I think, especially pronounced to the west, where you're going to be able to get almost to downtown Hopkins within 15 minutes if you hop on that train at 21st Street. So this is going to be a big transition, and I'm just going to flip back and forth between these two one more so you can kind of see how that access changes. So that's before and after. You can see the growth in those orange blobs. So what do we know about transit demographics? Well, right now, there are 44% people of color, 50% people under the age of 35, 40% have no working automobile, 43% have annual household income that's below $25,000. And the Green Line extension is projected to carry between 17,000 and 20,000 passengers per day. So those are all new park users. Those might be people that are coming to the park specifically and hopping on the rail specifically to do that. They might also be folks that are coming home from work and decide to stop for a walk or a quick swim on the way home. So the way that we actually sort of welcome those folks into the park and really prepare for those new users is a potential challenge and opportunity for this master planning process. So I'm going to switch from there to talk a little bit about circulation. And, we've already defined equity, but one of the things that we really want to call out is that this idea that inequitable situations can be created by treating the same things differently. They can also be created by treating different things the same. So a sidewalk is a sidewalk is a sidewalk, but the experience of using that sidewalk is going to be significantly different for women, for people of color, for people with different types of disability status. And that's something that we really want to be aware of and really trying to put ourselves in a place of empathy as we're thinking about the ways that something that might work well for us may not for everyone, as we are thinking about the ways that different moves and different movements happen in the park. People use a lot of different ways to get around in this park. And that's actually one of the things that's really beautiful about it. And it changes by the season. These maps that you're seeing are Strava data. So this is self-reported data from people who are walking, biking, paddling, swimming, skiing, doing winter and snow activities. And you can see all of these different really pronounced patterns of movement that people use when they're using different modes of transportation around these spaces. So some really beautiful mapping that we have here, but it also leads us to think a lot about, how are people experiencing these spaces as they're moving around. We've started to take a look at the cross sections in these different places and how different amounts of space are given over to different types of activities within these parks and how they vary by park. So looking at, what our typical walking path is like, what our bicycling paths look like, how we're dealing with automobility and how we're dealing with parking in these spaces. We've also been thinking quite a bit about where these kind of key entry points are. And this is something that, we brought up really when we were talking about back-end access too. Where are people's first moments in the park? Where do they know that they've actually arrived in the park? Which parts of the park have maybe more porous edges and which ones have really that more monumental sense? And then you'll see on this map, those two new light rail stops that are right on our park site, the one at Bryn Mawr Station and the one at 21st Street Station. Those are sort of new opportunities for us to think about how people are going to access these spaces as well. So as I said, when we think about circulation, we really want to think about the different ways that different people use space differently. So, for example, we know from research that women are much more likely to be encumbered by men when they are out as pedestrians. They're more likely to have something like a stroller. They're more likely to be carrying a large bag. And that means they use spaces differently. Likewise, someone without or someone with disability may be using spaces significantly differently. So when we're thinking about these types of spaces, we want to ask ourselves questions like, if two people in wheelchairs want to be side by side and have a conversation, are they able to do that? Do they have the space for that? If someone is coming from the other direction pushing a stroller, what's the choreography of that? Is there space for them to pass each other comfortably? Is someone forced off the path when that happens? Those are the sorts of things that we want to think about in really making sure that we have equitable access to these spaces. With regards to gender and sexual orientation, we also want to think about the ways that people may feel safe or unsafe in space, or the ways that we might be able to think about design as something that can contribute to spaces that are free from types of verbal harassment. So these are all things that we're going to want to kind of think about. And, we're really looking forward to having a great conversation with you this Tuesday, and we'll see you there. Thanks.